You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan. Today we have a backward-looking but forward-encouraging program for you. My special guest is Miriam Schneir, the preeminent chronicler of feminism, with her great trilogy, Feminism, the Essential Historical Writings, Feminism in Our Time, which contains foundational documents in the struggle for women's rights, and her newest book, the prequel, Before Feminism, the History of an Idea Without a Name. She's here with us today to discuss this newest book, which is one hell of a positive, revealing, and hopeful work, an instant classic. Also, since the holiday season looms and we will be taking next week off in observance of Indigenous Peoples Day, otherwise called Thanksgiving, we're going to borrow a leaf from Miriam and try to offer you a positive, revealing, and hopeful show. But first, we must go, as you well know. I didn't mean that to rhyme. Inside the headlines. Because my upcoming conversation with Miriam Schneir is so full of brilliant facts from history, or rather herstory, going inside the headlines in this case seemed, well, pre-redundant. But that presented the possibility, then, of compiling what I might otherwise call sweepings. You know, those interesting notes, clippings, and various stories that accumulate on one's desk, eagerly angling to get included in the next week's podcast. They are factual, solid, some are quite moving, and yet, for whatever reason, they don't make it. The subject of the show veers off into a different direction, or the tone doesn't accommodate them, or there simply isn't enough time or space to squeeze them in. Still, they're too good to just toss. They're nothing if not an eclectic bunch. One whole stack of them is easily, swiftly discarded, however, like this clip from May of 2020, the New York Times headline asking, "How far will Trump go to keep his job?" The subhead reads, "Anxiety levels increase as the president attacks the integrity of the vote." Well, we were young and greenly naive as to how deep this anxiety could go. Toss it. But to counter that, here's a clip, current, from the Washington Post. The headline reads, "Americans broadly support the Supreme Court upholding Roe and oppose Texas abortion law. Washington Post ABC poll finds by a roughly 2-to-1 margin." Now, I know we knew this in our hearts, which is probably why I didn't include it, but it's really good to be reminded in our brains and our muscles. The court knows this, too. Here's one from The Guardian, accompanied by a photograph of women in burqas, their faces uncovered, though many wear anti-COVID masks. They're wielding microphones and assault rifles, and marching in Afghanistan by the hundreds. Apparently, one of the biggest demonstrations was in central Ghor province, where women chanted anti-Taliban slogans. Halima Paratici, head of the Women's Directorate in Ghor, is quoted as saying, "There were some women who just wanted to inspire security forces, just symbolic, but many more were ready to go to the battlefields. That includes myself." A journalist in her early 20s added, "Violent conditions made me and other women stand up. The Taliban are frightened of being killed by us. They consider it shameful." What an amazement these women are. Here's the kind of thinking they're up against from a different, slightly older clip of about a year ago. Remember ISIS, the Islamic State? Well, as it came unglued, ISIS began offering money to fighters. For each of 2 wives, an average worker will receive $50. For each of his 6 children under age 15, he'll get another $35. And any female captive, a sex slave, entitles him to an extra $50. Salary details about what's left of the Islamic State are contained in a series of unusual documents released by a scholarly journal, the CTC Sentinel, published by the Combating Terrorism Center at West Point, New York. And here's a little packet of my own notes on populism. It interests me because Trump's is not a populism simply of economics, or even, as we've seen, religion, which its contradictory success with Christian voters demonstrates. When people say, "It's economics, stupid," those poor, middle-aged, white, working-class men with only a high school education and a lot of resentment at having been ignored, well, we should keep in mind that the driving force was and is not money. Since the median household income of Trump primary voters is about $72,000 a year, $16,000 more than the national median household income. No, this is a populism of identity, and identity is hard to crack because it goes to the heart of how people perceive themselves. It also is related to power and to fury at watching their white male power wane. And it's about the differences in how men and women interpret the same information. For example, an Iowa poll conducted by Public Policy Polling found that nearly half of Trump supporters believed that the Japanese internment camps in World War II were a fine idea. And a national analysis of Trump supporters by the New York Times found that 20% disagreed with the Emancipation Proclamation. Yeah, a lot of these men and women are rural. But here's an encouraging clip. Americans have so totally fled the farm that now only 2% of us till those legendary fields. The country has not had a rural majority since 1920. So one might well ask, why are we genuflecting to a supposed greater wisdom existing in what is known as flyover country? Look, I know some terrific women who live in flyover country and who organize there. But it's also true that men there, especially older white Americans with high school educations, are dying faster from what are called the 3 diseases of despair: drugs, drinking, and suicide. There are also the folks who refuse to wear masks or get vaccinated, thus dying even faster. This identification politics, growing out of but not constrained by party affiliation, is bigger than anything a party does. It's people's idea of who they are. This leads them to vote against their own economic interests, no matter how clear those are. You find the same situation in, of all places, Bavaria, where populists eager to bring down Angela Merkel and the idea of a liberal Europe have been rising. Some call it the Texas of Germany, a conservative bastion on the southern border, where it was assumed that people were bitter about lacking social benefits and about the economy in general. But new studies have exposed the fact that Bavaria has almost non-existent unemployment, generous social benefits, and is both rich and religious. Beneath those drindles and that lederhosen, Nazism first came into being. In closing, a practical clip from earlier this year that couldn't find its way into a commentary, yet might be especially important to women. It's titled, "What We Think We Know About Metabolism May Be Wrong. A New Study Challenges Assumptions About Energy Expenditure by People, Including the Idea that Metabolism Slows at Middle Age." That's the head. Now, conventional wisdom is that people put on pounds year after year from their 20s onward because metabolism slows. Women have slower metabolisms than men do, which is why we have a harder time controlling our weight, and menopause slows our metabolism even further. Or so says conventional wisdom. But it's wrong, according to a paper published last August in the magazine Science. Using data from nearly 6,500 people ranging in age from 8 days to 95 years, researchers discovered 4 distinct periods as far as metabolism goes, and also found no real differences between the metabolic rates of men and women after controlling for other factors. The 4 stages are from infancy up until age 11, when calorie burning is at its peak, accelerating until it's 50% above the adult rate. Then, from age 1 to about age 20, metabolism gradually slows by about 3% a year. In the period from 20 to 60, it holds steady, and after age 60, it declines by about 0.7% a year. Individuals, of course, vary. These findings, though, are likely to reshape the science of human physiology and could also have major implications for medical practices, like determining the appropriate drug dose. There's a difference between a 90-pound woman and a 300-pound man. When it comes to weight gain, well, there the issue is what it's always been: eating more calories than burning them. We have to take our first short break here, but we will return directly with Miriam Schneir and with a discussion about a book that is going to widen your eyes, make you furious and delighted and outraged and ready to work, and most of all, deeply grateful and excited, all at the same time. So, stay tuned. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
My guest for today's conversation is Miriam Schneir, the author and editor of a 3-book series dedicated to no less ambitious an endeavor than uncovering the hidden history of female people. It includes the anthologies Feminism, the Essential Historical Writings, which went into foreign editions in the United Kingdom, Australia, Russia, and Korea. The second volume, Feminism in Our Time, which contains foundational documents in the struggle for women's rights. And now she has completed the trilogy with a third, a prequel, titled Before Feminism, The History of an Idea Without a Name. Published this year, it traces the development of feminist sentiment from pre-ancient Greece to the founding of the first women's rights movement in 1848. Miriam co-authored with her husband, Walter Schneir, Invitation to an Inquest, a groundbreaking investigation of the atomic espionage case of Ethel and Julius Rosenberg. Then, as previously secret government files were made public, the Schneirs prepared follow-up editions of Invitation to an Inquest, and in 2011 they published a summing up, Final Verdict, What Really Happened in the Rosenberg Case. Alone or jointly written with Walter, who died in 2009, Miriam's articles have appeared in many national publications, including The Nation, Ms., the New York Times Magazine, and the New York Review of Books. An investigative report on right-wing attacks on the press received the Free Press Association's Mencken Award for Outstanding Journalism in Support of Liberty. Here, to my delight and my pride, is Miriam Schneir. Miriam, dear Miriam, welcome to Women's Media Center Live. Very good to have you here.
Thank you, Robin. It's a real pleasure for me to be with you.
Well, my dear, now this time you've really done it. Of all of your books, of all of your books about feminism, this is extraordinary. I've never quite said this about a book on this show, and it's been years. The book's called Before Feminism: The History of an Idea Without a Name. But what Miriam has done is answer the great plea of the great historian, feminist historian Gerda Lerner, when she said, women need to place ourselves at the center of history, not the sidelines. And from that center perspective, look out at the rest of history, and then we will be free. And what Schneir has done is put us there, because this book is before feminism, is before feminism and through it feminism. She's written remarkable texts about feminism and of feminist writings. This is incredible. I mean, congratulations. And
thank you so much, Robin. Coming from you, it really means a lot to me.
Well, it means a lot to me, honey. I've really never been quite this, over the moon about a book before, particularly one on feminism. After a certain point, you think, well, I've read that. I've read this.
What else?
Not a bit of it. Not a bit of it. And the parts that I have read were more revealing and revelatory. But the new things were extraordinary. Start by telling me, how long did this take you? Because it's a slender book. It's a small, regular-sized book.
Well, I was determined to keep it no more than 300 pages because I didn't want it to be daunting to readers. I wanted to be available for people, general readers could pick it up, could use it in classrooms.
Yeah.
That was a basic goal. And so it took me a very long time, Robin. I don't even want to say how long. I actually worked on chapters,
Yeah.
I would work on a chapter and be completely immersed in it, and maybe for 6 or 8 or 10 months. And then I would be done with that chapter, and I would heave a big sigh, and then time would go by, and then I would say, okay, I'm ready now to try to work on medieval nuns and see what that's all about. And so, again, I'd, plunge into it, and it would be all-consuming and would go on for many months, and then again, there would be a hiatus, a sort of recovery period.
Yeah.
So I was engaged with the book for many years, decades.
And during which time, of course, you also edited Feminism in Our Time, the Essential Writings, and the vintage book of historical feminism and stuff of that sort, all of which are incredibly valid and viable and inspiring and important. But the tone that you wanted, which is a non-academic, welcoming tone, quite a witty one at times, very dry, is right there. And it's not written in academies. Oh, my God. Anybody can pick it up and be as immersed in it as in a suspense novel.
So I'm not an academic, truthfully, and I actually can't read very dense academic prose myself.
Me neither. Shh, we won't tell. If there's anybody listening, don't tell an academic. No, I know exactly.
Thankfully, not all academics write that way, but
that's
the worst
true.
of it is pretty unintelligible.
Yeah. They lost me over deconstruction. I got completely abandoned the field of reading in academic feminist theory at that point. But this is, I thought I knew. This is in the, oh, you snob, you idiot, you stupid person, Robin. I thought I knew about the Eleusinian mysteries and about Crete, but I didn't know about the civilization in the city of Gortyn. I knew about Rome and the fall of the ultimate patriarchy, but I didn't know that there were women's Roman literary salons. I knew about the Nag Hammadi texts of early Christianity and the Book of Mary Magdalene, but I didn't know what followed. And the Dark Ages, once you hit the Dark Ages, oh my God. I mean, for the rest of us, women disappear in the Dark Ages, But no, not only were they banded together in supposedly safe places that became the greatest places of learning in Europe, but they were leaders and warriors and businesswomen in the Germanic tribes. Later on, they were the Benedictines with their centers of women's powers. They were female scribes who did the illuminated manuscripts. They were everywhere. This book shows us how they were everywhere, and they never stopped demanding, writing about, calling for their rights in so many words.
You know, when you look at the world through women's eyes, there's a process that I've seen referred to, and here's a long word, defamiliarization, but it's pretty clear what it means. Things that you thought you knew, when you look at them through women's eyes, they look different.
Totally.
Kind of sets everything on its head, and you begin to see that women's history can be a portal to understanding issues that are still, being argued about and thought about today, like power, authority,
right.
Definitely morality,
Oh, I'll say.
And of course, equality. So it's a different way of looking at the world and seeing what's changed. What did women bring to the world, and why was it so dangerous that it had to be silenced?
Again and again and again, too, because each time they spoke out, there was, to say the least, a backlash. I mean, and there were principled men who spoke out, too, like Averroes. But, I mean, in Al-Andalus, in Andalusia, there were all of these women. They were the woman doctor and the bloodletter and the peddler and the broker and the hairdresser and the professional mourner and the weaver and the singer, blah, blah, blah. And, and as well as rebellious literary women and poets who used forms of intellectual discourse to argue their case in so many words. This is, they kept writing these things saying the rights of women. Women are your equal. You are oppressing women again and again and again. And then the men did it again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. Well, what we find is that you get a certain perspective when you look at women's history, and I hope and I believe that it's a useful perspective for women today. It's, it provides a certain awareness of male supremacy, awareness that it's listed and it's existed through millennia.
Yep.
That women have been silenced. That a struggle does not have to be successful in its ultimate goal in order to be meaningful and important. And that what really matters is how far a group has been able to progress and what's been changed along the way.
Yeah.
You have to see women's history as kind of, to visualize it, I see it as a chain with each moment a kind of a link in that chain that's forged over centuries, really millennia.
Well, you've provided the chain, sweetheart. I mean, you really have. What I remember, they always used to say when we first raised this wave of feminism, the 7,000th wave, not the second, the permanent wave, I call it. When we would say, women this, first they would say, well, where are your great ...
Right.
And then when we would say, well, we don't know. We haven't done the research yet. We're doing the research now. There's the beginnings of women's studies. There had to be the first women demanding women's studies. I think that was Cornell was the first university who came forward with. And then women's studies had to produce a group of women scholars who later on would become heads of women's studies.
Right. That took a generation, really.
That's right, of course. I mean, but when they said, where are your great? They then would follow it with, you see, women have always been quite happy with the situation, or else there would have been rebellion. And this proves it. I'm just going to, never have a copy far from my hand and wave it in the air at people. It has copious notes. Everything is scrupulously researched and cited, but it's written in accessible, lively English, and it moves along at a lively pace. So I can't tell you how grateful I am for this book.
Well, I'm grateful for your comments about it, really. When Elizabeth Cady Stanton came to talk about her wish wish to create a women's movement, which
Yeah.
which is not the whole thing of feminism. I mean, feminism is much more than a
Right.
movement.
Of course.
But she said that the history of women was sad and dark and drear, and it just had nothing to offer them as they were trying to put together. She didn't know. I mean, how could she know? How could she? And the women who said, who kind of mourned that they were unable to accomplish the things that they wanted to accomplish, that they were barred from so many kinds of activities, they could not achieve any kind of professional standing. They were dependent economically. They were forced to be dependent economically.
That's right. Unless they were a rare widow or two.
Yeah. Well, there's a few princesses and things like that.
Right.
But basically,
basically,
we're looking at the rank and file of women.
That's right.
And I have this little quotation. It's just a sentence, and I'm going to read it because I think it's so beautiful and so correct. It was made by this woman, 17th century Dutch scholar, Anna Maria van Schoorman. Mm-hmm. And she said, "The reader of history finds no more record of women's names than a ship leaves of traces of her course through the waves."
Oh, God, it breaks your heart.
Yes, but, and she was right. It was true.
That's right.
She herself was forgotten for centuries.
That's right. Oh, the women of the Dutch Republic, what you do with them is, oh my God, it's just incredible. And there's a seamless interweaving in this that reflects your own consciousness, obviously, of African American women and the women of the New World once that settlement begins, or rather the conquest. And what is happening on so many different levels that as you stand back or pan back, as it were, as if it were a camera, you see this seething world of women scurrying around doing everything, every goddamn thing: education, economics, sexuality, religion, definitely religion, economic, again, industries, creating entire industries, the clothing industry in the New World, mercantile issues, and bakers and brewers and carters and spinners. And they're doing everything. They're working everywhere. Nowhere are they seen. Nowhere are they acknowledged. Very rarely do they make it into even the accounts. But you have somehow spied them out in the most abstruse places, and brought them to the fore. I mean, so I considered myself a fairly valid reader. So I knew about Christine de Pizan, of course, and I knew about Vittoria Colonna, being a friend of Michelangelo, blah blah blah. But I had never heard of Madalena Castellana.
Yeah. I had either. Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of Lucrezia Marinella of Venice. I had heard about Veronica Franco, but not her. But that was because Veronica Franco was a courtesan. I mean, there's just, for everybody I thought I knew, there's a wealth of women, and in fact, whole sub-movements of women that I didn't know.
So, you may have noticed that I dedicated the book to women scholars, and the reason is because no one person could do all that research. The research was done for me by a generation of women. They're specialists in various fields who searched the archives and found little nuggets of information and pulled them out.
So rich.
Yeah, and so that and what was painful to me was that all of this wonderful information was in books and in journals that were inaccessible to the people who really needed them.
That's right.
They needed them on their day-to-day life and their activism.
Yep.
And so that was really my principal goal, to take the work that had been done already. It had been done for like 50 years now.
But nobody knew about it, so what was the point?
Yeah, well, the point is that it's there, and it's there for the harvest.
Well, the thing is that you and your earlier writings created that generation of women scholars to whom this book is now dedicated. In other words, the women who did the work in the interim 50 years have now, it's cyclical. It comes back at you, if you know what I mean. And that's
you're
magic.
trying to say that it was me, but it was my generation, which includes you and thousands of women who worked very hard.
Well, it was worth every scintilla of it for this book alone. It is just an extraordinary piece of work, Miriam. It really is. This is the great Miriam Schneir, who has given us the history of feminism in many different ways, but this one wins. It's called Before Feminism: The History of an Idea Without a Name. And it has a quote on the back by me, which I'd forgotten that I made, and which I think is very moderate, actually. It says, it reads compellingly as a novel, and it's vivid life women who were visible and active long before there existed a word feminist to describe them. I should have said, I am hyperventilating with joy that this book exists. I am giving it to everyone for Christmas and for New Year's and for every other holiday that comes my way. And thank you, Miriam. Bless your dear, beloved heart for doing this book.
And thank you, Robin, for everything that you've done and for all your kind words.
Well, listen, if there was stuff that got cut from this book, I am ready for the second volume. I want to go on record
I hope
saying.
I can live to 100 in that case.
Okay, I'm for that. That's no problem. All right, darling. Thank you again. Excuse me. Thank you for Before Feminism and for everything you do.
Thank you for being you.
We have to take one last break, but then I'll be right back with some perhaps surprising fighting words. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Sometimes fighting words can be winning words. I will be always grateful to Miriam Schneir, especially for this new book, which made me proud and happy. I mean, of course it made me furious, parallel to every constraint placed against women's freedom, advancement, even selfhood. But there they all are, those women, glimpsed filling the world and the millennia with their presence, even when not allowed to have their own full-throated voices. Amazing. So I decided that we need a break in which to celebrate ourselves and our evolutionary slow inching along. Will they make it or won't they? What do you think? I decided to offer us a heap of good news in a time of weariness and danger. As one friend writes me, "Oh, Robin, such weariness." We don't do this often enough for ourselves and for each other. Share the good things that are happening. We really should. It might give us the balance we so desperately seek, because balance lends perspective. God knows that to try and live a life of attentiveness and ethics, as E.M. Forster termed it, to live life steadily and see it whole. Well, these days doing that can instead feel chaotic, destabilizing, even apocalyptic. Toxic nationalist movements rise around the world. Politics in democratic nations become increasingly polarized. Wealth gaps seem to continue to expand, and the specter of climate change hovers over all of us, menacing us. while its clock ticks loudly in our silences. Our World in Data and other such reliable websites are due gratitude from me for some of the following statistics, but all of my statistics are carefully sourced. So here goes in a somewhat random manner. During the last 2 centuries, our species has gone from constituting a tiny elite to a world where 8 out of 10 people can read and write. Global income inequality has declined significantly. As for life expectancy, according to the United Nations Population Division, a person born in 2017, on average, across the world, could be expected to live to 72.4 years. That's the highest number in nearly 6 full decades of record-keeping. Fertility rates are falling around the world. That's a good thing for overpopulation and for the environmental devastation that accompanies overpopulation. Child mortality rates also continue to plummet, and child marriage among females who were married or in a union before age 15 shrank from 8.1% in 2003 to 5% in 2018. There is a massive global gender gap in wealth and power that at current rates the World Economic Forum predicts will take another 100 years to close. But the trend is in the right direction, that at least. More women now hold government posts than ever before, comprising as much as 76.3% of legislative bodies around the world. That was in 2018, the last year that we currently have data for. That's up from 23.97% in the late 1990s. Also, both infant mortality and maternity mortality rates reached new lows in their respective recorded histories, at least globally. The United States is unique in its failures on that particular front. The number of people in poverty, for which read women and children, is at an all-time historic low. The United Nations measures extreme poverty as living on less than $1.90 per day. This is an extremely low poverty line that draws attention to the very poorest in the world. But these poverty figures also do take into account non-monetary forms of income, because for poor families today and in the past, this is important, particularly because such poor families, well, many of them are subsistence farmers who live largely from their own food production, and you know those are women. The extreme poverty measure is also corrected for different price levels in different countries and adjusted for price changes over time. That's inflation. Poverty is measured in so-called international dollars. As a consequence of these adjustments, one international dollar has the same purchasing power as one U.S. dollar, at least in 2011 that was the case, the last date for which we have workable figures. The majority of the world still lives in poverty, however. Every 10th person lives on less than $1.90 per day, and two-thirds live on less than $10 per day. But we have more access to pure drinking water, approaching 90%. We have greater access to electricity, and 11% of global energy now comes from renewable sources: wind, hydro, solar. Fewer people than ever before in recorded history die from air pollution. The total assets of institutions divesting from fossil fuel has gone from $5 billion in 2012 to, in 2019, $11.5 trillion. For the first time in human history, 2/3 of all human beings have access to essential health care. which includes reproductive, maternal, newborn, and child health, and infectious and non-communicable diseases. I could go on, but you get the point. You also know me. You know that I can be pessimistic up there with the best of them. Neither am I some perky little goody two-shoes spewing undiscriminating positivity and happy talk. After the 5 years we've been through with Trump, we should be generous and cheerful to those who brought us those years. But when you think of all the years before then, and the centuries before that, and the millennia preceding those, and how all that time each of us, somehow, merely human, women and men alike, brought her or his little chip of color to fill in the great mosaic that is humanity. Well, in that case, perspective is a great help indeed. Those are my fighting words. Add your fighting words on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words, and we will be on hiatus next week. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now Instagram at The Robin Morgan, and you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net and find my latest book of poems, Dark Matter, and my brand new novel, Parallax, wherever books are sold. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Join us again next time on Women's Media Center Live.